Okay, so here we are in the final video for the book of Genesis. We're going to focus on the last four parshas, which is the conflict between Joseph and his brothers. Now, this is four parshas of 12 parshas in the book of Genesis. That's 1/3 of the book. So this is going to be a central conflict, which is going to be repeated, unfortunately, throughout Jewish history, as you'll come to understand in later videos. To understand the source of the conflict, we have to understand the relationship of Jacob to his four wives. He's married to Rachel and Leah, we spoke about in the last video, but Rachel has a maidservant, her name is Bilhah, and Leah has a maidservant, her name is Zilpah, and altogether they're going to give birth to the 12 sons of Jacob, who are going to be eventually known as the 12 children of Israel, and the future founders of the 12 tribes of Israel. So let's look at the birth order, what happens. We're going to divide them into two groups because this is going to be the nature of the conflict. Remember from the last video, Jacob had wanted to marry Rachel first. He had just wanted to marry Rachel. Laban had tricked him and he ended up marrying Leah, and then he had to marry Rachel after that. So he ends up having all these sons from these two women and their maidservants. So this is the order of what happened. Leah starts off. She gives birth to Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, four sons. So right away she gets 1/3 of the sons that are born to her. Then Rachel, unfortunately, is barren. She's not able to have children, it seems, at least at this point. So she has Bilhah have children from Jacob, and Bilhah has Dan and Naphtali. So those are her two sons. Then Leah has Zilpah have children from Jacob. She ends up having Gad and Asher. All right, and then Leah herself has two more sons. She has Issachar and she has Zebulun. So Leah has 1/2 of the 12 sons. That's quite significant. Rachel, meanwhile, has no sons. So it's very, very tragic and hard for her as portrayed. And this is all, by the way, back here in Parsha 7, where we had said in the last video that this is where Jacob built up his family. She ends up giving birth finally to Joseph. So if you think about it, Joseph is the 11th son, but he is the firstborn of Rachel, which is the woman that Jacob had wanted to marry. So that's going to create, as we'll see, tension. And then eventually she has another son, Benjamin. Benjamin is actually born, the only son born in the 8th Parsha. And unfortunately, tragically, Rachel dies in birth, at the moment of birth, when she's giving birth to Benjamin. So it's that's the relationship. So this is all going to go into the story now between Joseph and his brothers through 9, 10, 11, 12. So in Parsha number 9, Joseph is portrayed as a very handsome, youthful person. He's favored by his father Jacob, as we said, because he was the firstborn of Rachel. And as a result, he's given a beautiful coat of many colors, and the brothers are jealous. Then Joseph has dreams of grandeur, that he's going to rule over the family, and the brothers are threatened. So they end up selling Joseph as a slave. He ends up in the land of Egypt. And that's in Parsha number 9. They tell their father that they indicate that Joseph has been attacked and he's dead, and Jacob is forlorn. He's just completely broken as a result of losing Joseph. Now Joseph ends up in Egypt, and at the very end of this Parsha, his master's wife, his master's Potiphar, his wife, ends up accusing Joseph of trying to assault her. He really tried to refuse her advances to him, and anyway, he gets thrown into jail. In Parsha 10, Joseph ends up becoming viceroy in Egypt. Now, the reason why that happened was Pharaoh, at the opening of this Parsha, is having dreams that no one can interpret. And Joseph, meanwhile, is in jail, and the Pharaoh is told that there's a Hebrew that can interpret dreams. When he was in jail at this point, in the end of Parsha number 9, there were two servants of Pharaoh, Baker and the butler, who were in jail, and he interpreted their dreams, and they came true. So Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams, and he sees in the future that, well, Egypt is going to be going through 7 years of prosperity, and then they're going to be hit by 7 years of a very severe famine. And Pharaoh is so impressed, he sees that Joseph is the man to help prepare Egypt for those years of famine, so he becomes viceroy in Egypt. When the famine strikes, the brothers come down from the land of Canaan to get grain, and they're eventually brought before Joseph. But Joseph, they don't recognize because he's got a beard, his time has passed, and he ends up accusing them of being spies. He doesn't reveal his identity, and he says the only way they can prove they're not spies is by bringing down Benjamin to Egypt. Now, all the brothers were in Egypt except for Benjamin, because Jacob did not want to lose Benjamin after losing Joseph. He was the only remaining son of Rachel. So they end up, it's a whole fascinating story. Eventually, they do bring down Benjamin. The plot thickens, but Parsha number 11 is when the brothers make peace. Joseph eventually reveals himself to his brothers. There's a reunion, and then Jacob comes down with his whole family to the land of Egypt. They're going to be, in total, 70 individuals in the land of Egypt, and he's reunited with Joseph, which of course is a high moment of his life. And then Parsha number 12, the wrap-up to the book of Genesis, that's when Jacob blesses his sons. He gathers his sons around his deathbed. He gives each one a blessing, identifies their strengths and sometimes their weaknesses that they have to be aware of. He passes away. When he dies, he's brought to the cave of Machpelah. If you remember, we said in Parsha 5, that's when Abraham bought that cave of Machpelah when Sarah died. So there's a tremendous procession from Egypt, and he's buried in the cave of Machpelah. And then at the very end, Joseph, right before his death, tells his brothers that they will eventually be redeemed from the land of Egypt. He dies, and he's put in a coffin or a tomb that's sunk into the river Nile, and that's the close of the book of Genesis. And Exodus, we'll see, is going to be how those 70 individuals turn into an incredible nation within the land of Egypt, and how they get out of Egypt. So that is the story of Joseph and his brothers. And as I said, this conflict between Joseph and his other brothers is going to be repeated throughout Jewish history. When we get to later videos, we will see that occur. So that's Joseph and his brothers. Let's do a little review. So here we go. And I'm just going to take away all the brothers. Now, why not get down the brothers as well? At least be clear in terms of who goes with whom or how many sons. I think that's helpful. So here we go. So Jacob has Rachel, Bilhah, Leah, and Zilpah. We'll split them to two groups. Leah has Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, the four. And then Rachel has Bilhah given to Jacob, and he has Dan and Naphtali from her. Zilpah has Gad and Asher. Then Leah has two more, Issachar and Zebulun. And Rachel finally has Joseph and Benjamin. They come at the very end. So 9, 10, 11, 12 is Joseph and his brothers. Parsha number 9, the brothers sell Joseph as a slave. He ends up in Egypt. He's eventually thrown into jail. He interprets the dreams of the baker and the butler. In 10, Joseph becomes viceroy in Egypt, and he calls his brothers spies. In Parsha 11, the brothers make peace with each other. Joseph reveals himself, and Jacob comes down with the family. And in Parsha 12, he blesses his sons. He dies, and at the very end, Joseph dies and is put in the river Nile. Great. So that is the book of Genesis. We've now gone through the first fifth of the Torah, and in the next video, we're just going to take a look at the timeline in the entire Torah. Now that we got this down, I think you'll appreciate how the Torah is broken down in terms of the passage of time.